But we have more earnings to get to. We'll keep the conversation going and welcome in our next guest, George Tsilis, our senior markets correspondent, as we get ready to get the earnings from Broadcom. Now, George, as we wait for Broadcom, what do you think is primarily in focus today?
Well, I think obviously they have to hit their numbers and maybe provide some guidance that's a little bit better than what NVIDIA did in terms of forward guidance. That's important because these companies, even though they're separate, are much together in terms of, the wired and wireless infrastructure markets and application-specific integrated circuits that Broadcom provides, the hyperscalers, and of course,
George,
NVIDIA's.
They've just come out, so I'll give you the numbers. They're just coming out right now. The third quarter EPS coming in at $1.69, just beating estimates for $1.67. Their net revenue coming in at $15.95 billion, beating estimates for $15.84. Also saying they see their fourth quarter AI semiconductor revenue to come in much higher than estimates for the next quarter at $6.2 billion. Estimates were calling for $5.82. That semiconductor revenue for this current quarter also beating estimates at $9.17 billion. Estimates calling for $9.1. So beats all the way across. Some of them not significant beats, but beats across the board here. And then as we're starting to get in some of their guidance coming across the wire now for the fourth quarter, at least in that all-important semiconductor revenue space, handily beating that estimate coming in at expected to be $6.2 billion, estimates calling for $5.82. Initial thoughts just as these numbers are coming in here.
Well, the guidance revision higher is meaningful, and I think that's why we saw it turn. Initially, there was a sell-off and it hit around 298 just a moment ago, and now we're quickly reversed. Again, the top line beat and bottom line beat are meaningful, but the biggest meaningful component is a semiconductor adjustment on revenue for next quarter, which is quite impactful considering, again, that was really where the hang-up was for NVIDIA post earnings. Again, it was contingent upon some of the challenges in the Chinese sales markets for NVIDIA. I think Broadcom is a little bit immunized compared to NVIDIA when it comes to China sales in terms of its total top-line sales needs in China relative to the domestic markets. But nonetheless, I think the market is pricing this lease right now appropriately considering, like I said, the beat on the guidance, at least the semiconductor revenues for next quarter.
And as some of their other guidance is coming in for fourth quarter of this fiscal year, they're guiding for $17.4 billion, which would be an increase of 24% from the prior year period. And they are projecting, Broadcom has made some lofty statements saying that they're looking at 60% growth in AI revenue coming into the next year. So while that's not the 60% growth, they're certainly still growing at a rate. The question is it sustainable enough? The street seems to like it, still up, but falling back, giving back some of those initial gains.
So this is a tough one because I think if you look at next quarter and you annualize next quarters, which I'm going to just say 17 billion, make it easy. That's placing top line sales for the fiscal year 25 closer to 66 billion, and that was prior to today's release was around 62. That's a meaningful increase. I do think that there's going to be a challenge, at least price wise, for Broadcom. And the reason I say this, Marley, is if you just consider the estimated growth rates going into this report at around 30%. Stock was already trading around 36 times next year's earnings. My point is it wasn't as cheap on a price to earnings growth ratio than NVIDIA going into this report. So unless they blow it completely out in terms of EPS guidance, I think maybe we'll end up seeing sort of a muted reaction just because of the move it's already made, about double on a 1 year basis. It's up 100%. $1.4 trillion market capitalization. I mean, it's a bigger company than Tesla now for what it's worth. But nonetheless, the numbers are improving. That should guide, again, the trajectory of price to the upside. I think the valuation at 1.2 times its growth rate, more expensive than NVIDIA, yes, but still growing, like I said, at 30% plus EPS growth numbers.
And still continuing to give up some of those gains here. We've just flipped to the downside just barely here. But, on the wake of NVIDIA and Marvell, seeing some drop off and not concerns about this potential AI bubble burst, do you think that this report has allayed some of those fears as they're lifting theirs on AI fueled demand for their chips?
There's two companies that I've noticed lately. Dell in the server markets, margins in the server markets are challenged, but that's server market. Marvell Marvell is a much smaller player in the ASICs market, application integrated circuit markets. Broadcom is the leader. I think Marvell's problem is a Marvell problem, maybe not necessarily market issues or end market demand issues. So I think end market demand is still firm. I think Broadcom, again, is drifting right now. Things can change because, things can change very drastically based on additional information that comes in the marketplace. I guess what I'm trying to say is Marley, I'm not using Marvell as a proxy for AI demand in the ASICs markets. I'm using Broadcom because they're the much larger leader in that space.
Yeah, and Broadcom, it's interesting. Sometimes we see these more volatile responses here. They are back in positive territory, not even about 0.25% here. But a huge move wasn't expected on this, just about 6% post earnings in either direction. Right. So not a highly volatile stock. But George, thanks for breaking that down for us right now as it stands after that top and bottom line beat and improved guidance going forward. Shares up about 0.3%.